My beloved child. The letter was never supposed to reach you this way. It had been folded twice, pressed beneath the cover of a book your soulmate had not opened in months, and hidden there with the strange care people use when they are trying to protect themselves from their own honesty. They had written it during one of those nights when sleep refused to come, when every ordinary sound in the room seemed louder because there was nothing left to distract them from what they had done, what they had lost, and what they still could not bring themselves to say aloud. For days, they had carried the thought of you quietly. Not romantically at first. Not in the dramatic way they once imagined love was supposed to feel. It began with smaller things. A cup left untouched because they suddenly remembered how you used to warm your hands around one before drinking. A sentence someone said in conversation that sounded almost like something you would have said. A song they immediately turned off because they knew where the next line would take them. Then came the book. They were looking for something else when it fell from the shelf. The cover opened against the floor, and between the pages was an old receipt with your handwriting on the back. Nothing important was written there. Just a few words you had scribbled while waiting somewhere together. A reminder about something ordinary. A small joke. The kind of thing nobody would save unless the person attached to it had become impossible to forget. Your soulmate stood there staring at it longer than they wanted to admit. And suddenly they remembered the last time you had been close enough for them to notice the tiredness in your face. You had been trying to say something that evening. They knew that now. At the time, they had mistaken your careful tone for another difficult conversation they did not have the strength to face. You had paused before speaking. Your fingers had rested against the edge of the table. You looked at them once, then away, and said something simple. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending this doesn't hurt. They remembered their answer too. That was the part they wished they could erase. They had sighed. Not because your pain did not matter, but because they felt cornered by it. They had been afraid that if they allowed themselves to understand what you were saying, they would have to change something. Make a decision. Admit what they had been avoiding. So instead of asking what hurt, they protected themselves with distance. You make everything heavier than it needs to be. You became very quiet after that. No argument. No dramatic exit. You simply nodded. That silence followed them now. The receipt trembled slightly between their fingers as the memory returned, because they finally understood something they had refused to see when you were still standing in front of them. You had not been asking them to rescue you. You had been asking them to stop making you carry the relationship alone. That realization was what led to the letter. They sat down with a blank page and told themselves they were only going to write one sentence. Just one. Something they would never send. Something that would allow the pressure inside them to loosen. But the first sentence became a paragraph, and the paragraph opened a door they had kept locked for too long. They wrote about the beginning. About how easily you had entered their life. Not with fireworks. Not with some impossible instant certainty. You simply became part of their days. They began checking their phone expecting your name. Began remembering small things you said without trying. Began noticing when something funny happened because their first instinct was to tell you. That frightened them more than they ever admitted. Your soulmate had always believed they would recognize danger by the way it hurt. They did not understand that sometimes the thing that frightens a guarded person most is being treated gently. You did not chase them when they needed space. You did not force answers they were not ready to give. You noticed moods they tried to hide and somehow knew when to speak and when not to. At first, they loved that. Then they became suspicious of it. Because being known creates a strange fear in someone who has spent years surviving by remaining partly hidden. They wrote that in the letter too. I think I started pulling away when I realized you could actually see me. They stared at the sentence after writing it. It sounded pathetic. They nearly crossed it out. Instead, they kept going. They admitted that there were times they intentionally responded late because your consistency had begun to feel like a responsibility. Times they acted uncertain because certainty would have required courage. Times they allowed you to question your importance because saying how much you mattered would have made the possibility of losing you feel real. There were no excuses in those pages. That surprised even them. For months, maybe longer, your soulmate had kept a private version of the story in which both of you had simply drifted apart. It was easier that way. Cleaner. You wanted too much. They were overwhelmed. Timing was bad. Communication broke down. Nobody was really responsible. But the letter destroyed that comfortable version. Because once they began writing honestly, they remembered the moments they had edited out. The message you sent after a misunderstanding, explaining yourself carefully while they answered with 3 cold words. The evening you apologized for becoming emotional even though they were the one who had disappeared without explanation. The way you started asking, "Is this a bad time?" before calling, because somewhere along the way they had made your presence feel like an interruption. And the moment they hated remembering most. You had once told them, almost quietly, "I feel like I have to become less of myself to keep you comfortable." They had laughed nervously. They thought you were exaggerating. You were not. The pen stopped there. For a while, your soulmate could not continue. They got up. Walked away. Returned. Read what they had written. Closed the pages. Opened them again. Part of them still wanted to protect their pride. Another part had grown tired of surviving every difficult feeling by pretending it did not exist. So they wrote the sentence they had avoided even in their own mind. I knew you were leaving before you left. That was the secret buried beneath everything else. Your distance had not surprised them. They had seen it developing. Noticed the messages becoming shorter. Noticed that you stopped asking questions about their day because the answers always seemed reluctant. Noticed that you no longer fought to be understood. At first, they thought the quiet meant things were improving. There were fewer arguments. Fewer uncomfortable conversations. Less pressure. They did not understand that peace and resignation can look almost identical from the outside. You had not become calmer. You had become tired. There is a difference. Your soulmate only understood that after you stopped reaching. At first, they waited for you to return to the old pattern. They expected another message. Another attempt. Another explanation. You had always been the one who reopened the door after silence. So they waited. And when you did not come, something inside them changed slowly. Not dramatically. There was no single morning when they suddenly understood everything. Instead, absence began teaching what your words never could. They would see something and reach for the phone. Stop. They would have a difficult day and think of the way you once listened without trying to fix them. Stop. They would meet someone kind and find themselves making comparisons they had no right to make. Stop. Your soulmate discovered that losing access to someone is different from losing feeling for them. That became another line in the letter. And still they did not plan to send it. Writing was one thing. Letting you read it was another. Because a letter like that does not ask only to be understood. It exposes the person who wrote it. After finishing several pages, they folded them and placed them inside the book. Then they tried to return to normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. The letter existed. That mattered. Words they had spent months refusing to say were now physically somewhere in the room, waiting. And once truth has been written down, silence becomes harder to defend. The next day, your soulmate pulled the letter out again. They read it from the beginning. Some parts embarrassed them. Some made them angry at themselves. One paragraph made them stop completely. It was the paragraph about the last real conversation between you. They had written, "You asked me whether I still wanted you in my life, and I told you I didn't know. I said I needed time. What I did not tell you was that I already knew I wanted you. What I did not know was whether I was capable of being the person you needed me to be." That distinction had followed them ever since. Wanting someone and knowing how to love them are not the same thing. They had confused the first for the second. Maybe you had too. There had been real feeling between you. Your soulmate did not deny that. The letter did not deny it either. But real feeling had not prevented fear, avoidance, pride, mixed signals, or the quiet erosion of trust. And now they were finally forced to ask a question they once thought love alone would answer. If you came back, would anything actually be different? They could not write yes immediately. That was one of the most honest things in the entire letter. Instead, they wrote about what they had started noticing in themselves. How they apologized too late. How they withdrew whenever emotion made them feel powerless. How they sometimes punished people with silence when they were actually afraid of being rejected. How they could want closeness deeply and still sabotage at the moment closeness required vulnerability. They had spent years calling this independence. It was not. It was fear dressed in more respectable language. The letter grew longer. But still, they kept it hidden. Then something happened that changed the way they looked at it. Someone asked about you. Not in a dramatic way. Your name simply came up. Your soulmate tried to answer casually. They said you were doing your own thing now. They said you had both moved forward. The person listening paused and then asked, "Did you ever tell them what really happened with you?" Your soulmate felt their body go still. "What do you mean? You always talked like they left you. But every time I saw you two together, they looked like they were waiting for you to decide whether they mattered." The sentence was not cruel. That made it worse. Your soulmate tried to defend themselves. They said you had your flaws too. You became distant. You shut down. You were not always easy to understand. All of that was probably true. But even while saying it, they heard the weakness in the argument. Because the conversation was not about whether you were perfect. It was about whether they had been honest. They had not. Later, alone again, they took the letter from the book. This time they added another page. I spent too long searching for your mistakes because it helped me avoid looking at mine. Then they wrote the part they feared you might misunderstand. They were not writing to ask you to come back. At least, not in the way you might expect. They did not want to turn confession into pressure. They knew an apology could become selfish when it demanded immediate forgiveness. They knew regret could become manipulation if it arrived only because loneliness had become uncomfortable. So they wrote, "If reading this changes nothing between us, I will accept that. I should have told you the truth while you were still asking for it. You do not owe me another chance because I finally found the courage I should have had then." They nearly cried writing that sentence. Not because it was noble. Because it made the consequence real. There might be no reunion waiting at the end of honesty. You might read the pages, feel something, and still choose distance. You might forgive them without returning. You might understand them and still decide that understanding is not enough. For the first time, your soulmate seemed willing to face that. That was when the letter stopped being a romantic gesture. It became an act of accountability. But the strangest part was still unwritten. The reason you must read it before tomorrow was not because some mystical deadline was approaching. It was because tomorrow your soulmate had decided they would finally make a choice that could not remain halfway. They had been holding on to something connected to you. A box of things. Small things. Nothing expensive. A card. A photograph. A key they no longer needed. A piece of paper with your handwriting. A few objects that would mean almost nothing to anyone else. They had planned to put everything away for good. Not destroy it. Not dramatically erase the past. Just stop living with one foot turned backward. And they had decided that before doing that, they would send you the letter. Once. No repeated messages. No emotional chasing. No demand for response. They would tell you the truth and allow the truth to stand without controlling what you did with it. That is why they rewrote the final page more than once. The first version sounded desperate. They tore it up. The second sounded too careful, as though they were still hiding behind dignity. They tore that one up too. The final version was simpler. It began with a memory. They reminded you of one evening when the two of you had sat together without talking much. You had asked them a question they did not understand at the time. Do you ever wonder what people would say if they weren't afraid of the answer? They had laughed and changed the subject. Now they understood. The letter ended like this. I was afraid of the answer to almost everything that mattered between us. Afraid you would know how much I cared. Afraid I would disappoint you. Afraid I would need you. Afraid you would leave after seeing the parts of me I kept hidden. I thought distance would protect me from loss. Instead, it helped create it. I don't know what this means for us now. I only know you deserved the truth before silence became the whole story. I loved you in ways I did not know how to carry. And sometimes I made you feel unloved because I was too afraid to admit how much power loving you had over me. That was wrong. You were not asking for perfection. You were asking me to show up honestly. I did not. If there is still a door between us, I will not force it open. If it is closed, I will respect that too. But I could not let another day begin with you believing you imagined what was real between us. You did not imagine it. I was simply not brave enough to live inside it properly. Your soulmate stopped there. They did not write, "Come back." They did not write, "I cannot live without you." They did not promise they had become a completely different person overnight. They did something harder. They left the truth without decorating it. And somewhere inside you, perhaps a part of you has always wanted exactly that. Not a dramatic return. Not a perfect apology. Not proof that you were unforgettable. You wanted to know whether the pain had meant what you thought it meant. Whether you had been too sensitive. Whether you had asked for too much. Whether the tenderness you remembered had been real or merely something you created because you needed it to be. The letter cannot erase what happened. It cannot give you back the nights you spent questioning yourself. It cannot repair trust by existing. But it may give language to something that once had none. And that matters. Because sometimes closure is not discovering that someone never loved you. Sometimes closure is discovering that they did love you, and that love still was not enough to make them ready. That truth can hurt in a different way. But it can also set something inside you down. The letter is no guarantee of tomorrow. It does not tell you what decision to make. It does not promise a reunion. It does not ask you to reopen a wound just because the person who caused it finally understands the scar. It only places the past in clearer light. And perhaps that is why your hands shake a little as you unfold the pages in this story. Not because you are about to discover that someone secretly loved you. You already knew there was feeling there. What you are discovering is that your leaving was understood. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not when you needed it most. But eventually. They saw the moment you stopped fighting. They remembered the sentence they dismissed. They recognized the patience they had mistaken for permanence. They realized that losing you did not begin when you walked away. It began each time you reached for them and they made you feel foolish for reaching. And now, before tomorrow arrives, there is only one thing left that truly matters. Not whether you answer. Not whether they return. Not whether the story becomes romantic again. What matters is that when you finish reading, you no longer have to carry their silence as evidence that you were never important. You were. But importance is not the same as readiness. Love is not the same as courage. Regret is not the same as change. And an apology, even a sincere one, does not decide your future for you. So you fold the letter slowly. You do not know what you will do yet. Perhaps you place it beside you and sit quietly for a long time. Perhaps you cry. Perhaps you feel relief instead. Perhaps something you thought would feel like a victory feels strangely gentle. Because the person you once waited for has finally said the words. And now you understand something neither of you understood when you were still trying to save what was between you. The most important part of the letter was never the confession that they loved you. It was the moment they finally stopped asking their fear to speak on their behalf. Tomorrow may bring an answer. Or distance. Or a conversation neither of you knows how to begin. But tonight, there is no need to invent the missing truth anymore. It is there in your hands. Imperfect. Late. Human. And finally honest.